I'm discussing legal issues in the workplace. This can be very interactive because there are three of us.
Do you want to
yeah, come closer. I feel like we should all sit in a circle or something, like do trust games. So I'm Owen. I guess we could all introduce ourselves.
I'm Brandon. I also work at Chicago House with Owen, so I haven't had the chance to see the actual presentation, so I decided to hop in.
I'm Tessa. I work here at Wine and Roosevelt.
Tracy from Windy City Times.
Hello. So this is sort of like a cribbed version of the training. I left a lot of space in the training for Q&A, thinking that there would be a lot of questions, as there usually are. So if you have questions, just stop me. This is really geared towards people who are seeking employment. Hello. So this is going to be a very intimate training. Meaning small. Okay. So the first part of the training is just sort of an overview of discrimination protections. So there are a lot of different types of protections that we have in the workplace. So there's federal types of protections for some folks. In some instances, there is statewide protection for workplace discrimination, depending on the size of your employer, the type of employer, and there are some exceptions to the discrimination law. On the basis of sexual orientation, race, age, disability, gender identity. And gender identity is included in our state human rights law in the definition of sexual orientation, which is a little bit like for trans folks, because we know that sexual orientation and gender identity are different things, but there's a whole backstory for why that is. I'm sure some of us could fill in why that happened, but it's there. We actually have even more expansive protection as folks who are in Cook County and Chicago, because we also have protections from employment discrimination on these bases and more. One of the most important bases that many people don't know about is that we have protection from discrimination on the basis of our arrest record. So this is not convictions, but just the fact that one has been arrested. It's actually a violation of our Illinois human rights law to be terminated or discriminated against on the basis of an arrest alone. I think the idea behind that is that just because an arrest happens doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong, doesn't mean it's a lawful arrest, but it's still going to be on your background unless you're eligible to expunge that arrest or seal that arrest. So on the city level, we have human rights protections in our municipal ordinance as well as the county ordinance. The federal law is a little bit tricky. So we know that we don't have a national non-discrimination law that applies specifically to LGBT folks, right? And there's just been years of battle for that and lots of questions of who's included in that and what the Employment Non-Discrimination Act should entail. Needless to say, we don't have it. However, we do have an administration right now, the Obama administration, that is doing as much as it can with the existing protections that we do have. So we have the Civil Rights Act, which protects against discrimination on the basis of sex. And there are questions about what that means. Does that mean if you're fired for being transgender, you're being discriminated on the basis of your sex? It would kind of seem like in some ways it is, because that law has been interpreted to even include things like sex-based stereotyping. So being fired because you're not feminine enough or not masculine enough in the workplace. And so we have some bad case law on that. We actually have case law right here in the 7th Circuit that tells us very clearly it doesn't apply to trans folks. But the Obama administration is changing that interpretation and enforcing it as though it does. So the EEOC, which is the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, is using that sex-based stereotyping for federal employment discrimination protections right now. So if you feel like you have that type of discrimination, it might be good to have a conversation with someone at the EEOC, which will do an intake. They help you file a complaint. All of these processes are completely free to file a complaint of discrimination. But however, you do not have the right to an attorney. So you can do it on your own, but it can be a little bit tricky to navigate, even though it's a free process. So what does discrimination actually look like in employment? Usually what we see are unequal hiring practices. So some groups of people being given preferential treatment or detrimental treatment in hiring on the basis of one of those illegal categories for doing so. Unequal promotions and transfers. So this is sort of once you're already inside, it can be discriminatory if you're always at the lowest pay scale, you're never being received for a promotion, you're applying and you feel like you're equally qualified and you're constantly being passed over. And you see other people with other races, gender identities, sexual orientations who are being promoted, making more money, right? Unequal discipline or discharge. This is a big one that I've personally seen with the employment discrimination cases I've litigated, which is that we'll see, for example, there's a policy at work that says you have to iron your clothing and you can't have any wrinkled clothes when you come to work, whatever the job is. And you'll see, your friends who are straight with wrinkled clothes and nothing happens. But you come in one time with wrinkled clothes and you are told that this is a disciplinary action because of your clothing, right? And you're like, but wait, all these other folks, they're all crumpled and rumpled, like, why me, right? That could be unequal discipline or discharge, right, on the basis of even a legitimate rule or regulation. And then unequal pay. This can be very hard for us because most of our employers do not disclose how much our colleagues are making unless you work for the government, and then usually it's public information, which is nice. That's one of the nice things, right? So if you find out that, oh wait, I'm the only woman who works here and I'm making 50% of what everyone else is making and I'm doing the exact same job, right? This could be discrimination that's protected under these laws. And then finally, harassment. So this is creating a environment, right? A cultural environment in the workplace that is toxic and discriminatory. So that might mean being called a fag at work, being made fun of. Your supervisors know that this is happening with other staff and they're not doing anything about it. Being outed, not being allowed to use the restroom of your preferred gender identity. These are all kind of harassing actions that could be violations of discrimination law. Now, I usually say, just kind of as a practice tip, that even though we have all these rights, we can file complaints when these things are happening. I always think it's nice to have knowledge of these laws kind of in your back pocket and use them when necessary, but that litigation is a pretty terrible way to have a conversation about something wrong that's happening, right? It's a good thing to be like, okay, if you're not going to talk to me, if we're not going to be able to have a conversation with the HR person or whoever else, right? Or if you haven't actually gotten the job, so you feel like you've been discriminated against in your application process, then it could be your only remedy. Once you're in, sometimes using these laws as leverage with employers to try to get them to do the right thing and do the thing that's legally the right thing can be quite helpful. The process takes quite a long time. So if you file a complaint of discrimination, for example, with the City of Chicago Commission on Human Relations, which Mona Noriega is currently the commissioner of, they have 365 days, they have quite a long period of time to do an investigation. So the commission's role is both to kind of figure out what happened. Sometimes you as the employee, you don't have all the information that you might want or need in order to prove your case. You feel like something's happening, you're like, I'm watching everyone else get promoted, I know I'm not getting promoted. And so that investigatory power allows the administration to ask the employer, okay, we need to see all the data, who's being hired, how much folks are making, right? And they have the power to do that and request that type of information once the complaint has been filed. And then they're looking for substantial evidence that discrimination has occurred. If they find that there's substantial evidence of discrimination, then you can go into an actual adjudication process. So that's a formal hearing, or in some cases, stepping over to an actual court and filing a complaint in court. If you file a complaint in court, you have all of the powers of the rules of evidence and subpoena powers, etc., to really get as much information as you might need to prove your case. Something that's tricky is that it's very rare for an employer to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to hire you because you're gay, right, in this day and age. I think most employers know that we can't say these things, right? So it becomes this proving a pattern and practice of discrimination, which is trickier, especially if you don't have a lot of funds to pay someone who has investigators themselves to prepare that case for you. Anyway, this is something that we help with at the Trans Life Center in the Trans Legal program. So if you feel like you might be having some type of discrimination, that's one resource that you could call. Also, because it is a completely free process, you can use the administration, which is an uninterested third party, right, as the resource. So you could go to the commission, for example, or the EEOC and say, this is what's happening. I think this is discrimination. Is this a violation of my rights? And they can tell you, sounds like that could be a violation. Do you want to file a complaint and help you with that? Yeah.
I have a question. It doesn't bother me now, but a long time ago when I was, trying to get hired at a non-profit, I went to dozens of interviews, very well prepared, and didn't get the job. But I also recognized the look very, very well now,
right.
as a trans person.
Right.
But they don't have to tell you why they don't hire you.
Right.
And a lot of times they didn't. They just said, we went with someone else, we went in a different direction.
Right.
There's no way to prove it, right, that they didn't hire me because I'm trans, other than saying, well, I saw the look. I mean, that's
right.
not is there any recourse that someone who's trans may have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this would be a pattern and practice question. And I'm going to be totally honest with you, it is very hard to prove. Very hard. And I would say that even the knowledge of these departments that are charged with enforcing these human rights protections are still kind of getting up to speed on what it means to be discriminated against because one is transgender or on the basis of gender identity, which actually includes more folks than just trans people, right? Like if someone who's a very effeminate gay man is not hired because of their effeminacy, if that's even a word, that's discrimination on the basis of gender identity, right? About that person's gender performance. Yeah. So usually a pattern in practice, this is when the investigatory powers are really helpful. So that means that maybe we send in testers on the federal level if we're thinking about like race-based discrimination or gender discrimination. They might send in testers, which means folks who are basically testing whether or not discrimination is happening, who are trans or not trans, and looking for that pattern in practice. Or looking at employment records. How many people did you interview? How many people did you offer the job to after an in-phone interview where you might not have known what someone's race was, but when you met with them, right, suddenly the job's gone, right? So that's tricky, it's more expensive, and so it can be hard to prove. But I really think that one of the ways that we push these laws is by using them, especially because it's a free process. You don't have to pay any filing fee to start this investigatory process. We need to start filing when we have real incidents of discrimination. Yeah. The one that I think is very exciting as well is this arrest record one. A lot of people don't know that if you have an arrest record, you cannot have a negative determination made in employment on the basis of that arrest record in the state of Illinois. And so if you are being terminated or not hired and you're told that the reason is because of your criminal record, that is definitely something to note in your mind, because I'm not certain that employers really understand that this is a protection in our human rights law.
Can you clarify that arrest record? You're saying
Yes.
that very specifically versus criminal record?
Yes, arrest record. So, for example,
You get arrested for
Yeah.
driving on a suspended license.
yes, exactly.
You might not necessarily have been
Right.
fingerprinted, but you were taken into the station.
Right, exactly. Right, arrested for driving on a suspended license unless you expunge that record. And you may not be eligible for expungement for certain types of things, but if you do, or unless you do, then you have this record, right? And so the employer gets 20 people, 19 of them have arrest records, one doesn't, right? And so an employer might say, okay, here's the person who's had no criminal background. That person is preferable. But the Illinois human rights law says no, because anyone could be arrested at any time, right? I'm sure that they wouldn't, or hopefully they wouldn't, but the police could come in here right now and arrest us all. It wouldn't be a legal arrest, but it would have happened and it would be on our background, right?
But so it doesn't protect based on your criminal record?
Right. Criminal record is still a perfectly legal reason to discriminate against someone in Illinois if you have a criminal conviction.
Okay.
Yeah. And important to note, court supervision. So sometimes if you have a misdemeanor charge, you may have been offered a plea deal to court supervision, which is a period of time where if you are not arrested again, if a violation of supervision isn't filed against you, it's not technically considered a conviction under Illinois law. People don't know that because they've pled guilty, and so they feel that that must be a conviction, but it actually is. It's included in this non-discrimination on the basis of an arrest record. So especially for folks who have experienced any type of criminalization or policing, it's really important to know that you have that protection. Yeah.
What about things that happen as a result of you being arrested? For example, if you were to miss an interview because you were still being held, because in Cook County you can be held up to 30 days without a preliminary hearing, so you can be held without being charged.
Yeah.
What happens if what happens if you lose your job because you didn't show up for 3 weeks, but it was because you're arrested, you're released, you weren't charged? How does that work?
Unfortunately, I don't think that there's a protected remedy for that because the statute is very clear. It's on the basis of the arrest record, not what happened as a consequence of arrest, right?
Okay.
The other thing to note is that if you are told by an employer that you are not hireable or are terminated because of a criminal background, even convictions, you have a right under federal law to see a copy of that criminal background before any negative decision is made in your case. So if an employer says, oh, I'm sorry, we found this when we ran your fingerprints, you have a right to see that. And that's important because oftentimes employers are not going to the Chicago Police Department or the Cook County Clerk's Office to find your background. They're going to a private company who they're paying money. There's lots of room for error, especially if they're doing a name search, not a fingerprint search, right? There could be other people with your name. There could have been a clerical error. You need to see that background, and you have a federal right to do so, to see it before you are terminated or not hired because of it. So,
Question, Owen.
yes.
I'm sorry, I came in a little late.
Yeah.
You talked about not being hired because of your criminal. What if somebody was arrested for a warrant? Is that the same?
Same thing, depending on what happened with the case that the warrant was issued because of. But yeah. So same thing. If the arrest is just that warrant, right, and there's no conviction, then this would definitely apply.
Okay.
Yeah.
I applied at all these a couple of times, and they never called me back. I went up there constantly, repeatedly, just keep on up there. Here, check on the status of my application. I got nothing back. I was told by the security guard that the reason why they didn't call me back is because I had 2 felonies on my background. And I said, well, I didn't think that, that was right because I'm a hard worker, I'm determined, I do my job and I do my job well. Yeah. And I didn't feel that I should have been not hired, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but because I had felonies in my background.
Yeah, so this is a very tricky area. So there's a bunch of different things. There's one, some employers don't ask about criminal background, right? And my motto is sort of like, don't ask, don't tell. Like, if they don't ask, there's no reason to disclose criminal background, right? It's the employer's burden to ask if they need to know. And then if they do ask, it's just important to look very closely at what they are asking. Are they asking if you've ever been arrested? If they are, this is a problem. They shouldn't be asking if you've been arrested. They're asking if you've ever had any criminal conviction, then usually that requires an answer. That doesn't always mean that you will not be hired or you'll be terminated because of that conviction. Although what we do see sometimes is for folks who don't answer that question or say no, and then later there's a background check, employers will say, well, you lied on your application, right? And so that's the reason why we're not hiring or whatever. So in an instance like this, what I would suggest doing is talking to the EEOC. You can go in.
The EEOC?
EEOC, that's the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They're located downtown in the Loop. And talking with them because they are looking at this is kind of like a whole other training, but we have, we see certain identities of folks who are overrepresented in the criminal legal system, right? And so if the criminal conviction becomes the reason why we can actually discriminate on other basis, right? If it's like the thing we're saying, oh, it's because of this, but not because of gender or race or this or this or this, there might be a federal protection there. And the EEOC is really thinking hard about that. So if we can make the connection between criminalization and employment, then the EEOC makes a lot of sense. So I think it would be good to talk with them about it, but generally speaking, an employer can terminate on the basis of a conviction alone. There is not a protection in the law against that. And so this is why it can be really important to think about your criminal background disclosure, and also whether or not you have post-conviction options like sealing, expungement, executive clemency, certificates of rehabilitation, all of which are options in Illinois. So, criminal background disclosure. This is the first thing that you want to know if you have had any involvement in the criminal legal system, even if it's just been that arrest for driving on a suspended license. Not that I'm saying that's happened to you, but as an example, right? You just want to know what it is. You want to have all the information. And that's also helpful just kind of on an employment tip. Employers like to see that people know what's going on with their lives, right? And if they have a question about, okay, I see this conviction for, loitering from 2007, and you're like, I don't have that, and you do. Or you're like, I don't know what that was about, or I can't remember, or I don't think that was a conviction. That doesn't look good just in a kind of interview sense, right? You want to be like, yes, this is exactly what happened. I know that I'm eligible for expungement on this date. I'm planning on expunging. This is what happened. Or kind of disclosing whatever you feel like is appropriate given the situation. You are definitely going to want to know what type of charge it was. Was it a misdemeanor? Was it a felony? And know what that means as far as what your relief is. How long has passed since, and the circumstances. So I know in our TransWorks training at the Trans Life Center, we definitely talk about, sort of self-disclosure around circumstances. Some people want to say, this is my entire life story, this is where I was at, I was living on the street, this and this happened, and really explain that. Some people don't feel comfortable explaining their whole life story in a job interview, like in the entry of Chipotle or whatever it is, right? Like, there could be moments where it feels good to do that and moments where it really doesn't. But knowing the answers to these things are going to show a lot to an employer, even if they're true. And just really sort of taking ownership of the fact that that happened. And then again, like I said, knowing what you're eligible for as far as sealing and expungement. So sealing and expungement get confused a lot in our vernacular. The first thing to note is that these laws are different in every state. So if you have an arrest or conviction that's not in Illinois, everything I'm about to say doesn't apply because the law is going to be different in every single state. Some states never expunge, some states make it much easier to expunge than here. Some people think of expungement differently and define it differently in the statutes than we do here. Here, the statute for expungement means to literally destroy the record, right? So I picture it like very Lord of the Rings, like it's being thrown into like fiery Mount Doom and it's gone forever, right? It's amazing. And I think we could make a lot of comparisons to the criminal legal system in Lord of the Rings, but that's a whole other thing. That's 102 of this section. So expungement in Illinois applies only to non-convictions, right? So if you have been convicted, you are not eligible for an expungement. And there are some exceptions to that, but that's generally the rule. This is a very confusing area of law, so it's really good to have an attorney help you with this. So if you have arrests, you're eligible for expungement. If you have convictions, you're eligible for sealing. Now remember, court supervision is not an expungement in Illinois if it was completed successfully, so that would be included in the expungement category. So arrests without a conviction, arrests you were never charged, arrests that were dismissed, non-suit, SOL, noli pros, arrests where you went to trial and you came back with a not guilty jury verdict, which is like awesome. If that's ever happened to anybody. And court supervision. Sealing applies to convictions. There are some types of convictions that the statute clearly states are not eligible for sealing. These are generally convictions that involve specific types of violence. So for example, domestic battery, even though it's a misdemeanor, a Class A misdemeanor, is not eligible for sealing. And then it includes certain classes of felonies. Yeah.
You said domestic battery is not eligible for a seal?
That's right.
Okay, what about like aggravated assault?
No, it would not be. So then there's a different type of relief that you'd be applying for.
Misdemeanor is not eligible for seal?
It is not, and I can let you know exactly. Actually, I'll just tell everyone exactly the types of charges that are not eligible, that are misdemeanors. Strange ones: driving under the influence, so a DUI, not eligible for sealing. Dog fighting, I don't know anybody that has that conviction, but if you do, not eligible. Indecent solicitation of an adult, adultery. Nobody ever gets charged with adultery. Fornication, public indecency, and public indecency is something that we see, particularly in the LGBT community, as a discriminatory enforcement of laws for folks that, I don't know, are doing things with choice amounts of clothing on outside. Marrying a bigamist, also nobody ever gets charged with that. Marrying a bigamist.
That's just a person that's married, say I'm married to you and I'm married to her and I'm married to her.
Right. It's actually a crime in Illinois. Who knew?
No, you go to a different country, it's okay.
And look, just in the state, you can do that too. Well, a man can do it. I mean,
Not in the US.
Yeah.
I'll get back on
I
that.
don't know too much about bigamy laws, actually. But, yeah.
For the most part, they are illegal in all 50 states.
Yeah. So then assault, aggravated assault, battery, domestic battery, criminal sexual abuse, and reckless conduct are all non-sealable also.
So most jobs are not going to let you work. Most jobs are not going to hire you unless you really know the national. They're not going to hire you because they're really going to if it ever stays on your record.
It stays on your records. There are some other types of relief. So the two main other types of relief would be, and for certain types of charges, and I don't know these off the top of my head, so I don't know if that exact charge applies or not, but a certificate of rehabilitation, which is a certificate you can get from the court system that says you've been rehabilitated, and you can bring it to the employer to state, and it shows that a Cook County judge took into effect everything else you've been doing with your life, your degrees, your whatever it is, and that they find that you've been rehabilitated from whatever that was. There's also a petition for executive clemency, which means you're petitioning the governor. So if you think about this, expungement and sealing is in the judicial world. So it's in the court context. You're going to file. You're going to have a hearing at 26 in California about it. It's criminal, right? Criminal context. Executive clemency is under the executive branch. So this is the governor's office, right? It's not in the court system at all. You're asking the governor, who has a power granted an authority in the Constitution to grant executive clemency, which is like a pardon for a conviction. Sometimes you'll hear about this happening, like when a governor or a president of the United States is leaving office, that they are granting clemency or pardoning people for convictions. Our governor right now, Governor Quinn, if you're having any questions about who to vote for, this is one of the plus Quinn tick marks, which is that Governor Quinn has been granting more clemencies than any governor before in Illinois. And I think he's really understanding of how criminal backgrounds are a real hindrance to folks actually having lives after conviction. And if we think about the criminal system, right, the idea is that you go do whatever your sentence was, whether it's incarceration, community service, being on probation or parole, all the different things, paying fines, and that is supposed to be it, right? So having this thing carry after you the rest of your life doesn't make a lot of sense. So it's a really good time to file executive clemency petitions, and that's another free thing. It doesn't cost anything to file. It happens through the mail, and then you have a hearing at the Thompson Center downtown. You can also have a hearing in Springfield. So you can choose which place your hearing is, and you are presenting why you think the governor should should pardon your convictions, and you're presenting that to members of the prisoner review boards. Those are the same folks that grant probation and parole mostly. And they make a recommendation to the governor. That's how it works. Yeah.
Did you say prostitution is among the unsealable?
No, it's soliciting a prostitute. Let me
Are
see.
you paid mom?
Solicitation for a prostitute. Yep. Keeping a place of prostitution, patronizing a
Like a
prostitute,
brothel?
and pimping.
So being a prostitute is sealable.
Absolutely, yes. And for a long time, prostitution has been, after your first conviction, it could be charged as a felony. And it was one of the few felonies that were actually sealable. Now, thank goodness, thanks to a lot of awesome activists, we no longer have felony prostitution in Illinois. So this is still only a misdemeanor charge, no matter how many times you've had that conviction. The other types of sealable felonies are certain Class 3 and Class 4 felonies. Most of them are drug-related, non-violent, non-sex-related charges. Anything that requires registry with the sex offender registry is not going to be sealable. And there are some waiting periods. So this is another reason why it's really important to talk with an attorney, because even if you are eligible to seal or expunge your record, you may have to wait some time from the time of your last termination of your last sentence. Yeah.
No, you finish.
Oh, okay. There may be some waiting periods. And then the other thing that I always like to remind folks is that this is discretionary. This is discretionary relief. And this is something that is confusing for folks who are applying. Even if you have something that's eligible for expungement, it is discretionary, meaning a judge does not have to expunge your record, even if you're eligible. So, for example, if you have, 50 misdemeanor convictions, the state's attorney's office will very likely object to you petitioning, even though all of those convictions might be eligible for sealing. And then you have to go in front of a judge and you have to argue why it's in the interest of society, like in the public's best interest, that your record be sealed, and also in your best interest. And the judge has discretion. So that's important to remember. So you really want to prepare for these hearings. The process is that you first have to get your rap sheet. If you were arrested in Chicago, your rap sheet is your criminal background. It stands for Records of Arrests and Prosecutions, rap sheet. So it's the record of all your arrests and prosecutions in the city of Chicago. You attach that to the petition. Petition is the fancy word for asking the court to do something. You're petitioning the court. As long as you know that you're eligible, you've passed all the waiting periods. You file that petition at the Daily Center if you were arrested in Chicago. So that means you're going to go to the 10th floor of the Daily Center, you're going to file it. There's a fee waiver. If you need a fee waiver, it's $60 per case. So if you have a lot of cases, that includes arrests, it could be very expensive. So you're going to want to get that fee waiver if you can.
How do you know if you're eligible for the fee waiver?
Okay, so our indigency statute in Illinois says if you are on SSI receiving food stamps, if you make 125% or less of the federal poverty line, so that's about $14,000 a year or less annually, or if it would cause you substantial hardship if you had to pay those fees. So that just means you might have to go in front of the judge and say, this is my income, I'm right over that line, but if I had to pay X amount of dollars, I wouldn't be able to file today. That's actually what the statute says. You can't file today. So I picture that, and I read the statute to say, like, even if you make $100,000 a year, if that extra, like, $60 is going to push you over the edge, you should be eligible. But really, they're just looking for those types of proof. Yeah.
Wait, your registration is good and stuff, but there's like little small intricate little details that I think people should want to know, especially me.
Okay.
So like, is there a book like a person can get that will like break down every little point, like key point?
Yes. It's available online. It looks like this. It's from the State Appellate Defender. I can actually give you this copy if you want. I only brought one, so you two can share. Or maybe we can find a copy machine.
One in the back.
Okay. Yeah, we'll copy it. So this is available in a PDF online for free. If you Google Illinois expungement, this is the first thing that will come up. It's from the Office of the Appellate Defender. It walks you through the expungement and sealing process. It also lists on the back what you're eligible for, and the waiting periods. It really spells it all out for you. It's in color when you look online, so it's a little easier to read than this. It's like a lot of words. There's also questionnaires. So if you go onto this website, it will ask you questions, so you don't have to map it out yourself. It will say, were you convicted for this type of crime? If you answer yes, go to this question. If you answer no, go to this question. You can really like follow the question, and it will let you know if you're eligible, when you'll be eligible, if there's a waiting period, and then what other remedies are if you're not eligible for sealing or expungement. Yeah.
And then like if a person ever like is still lost or like a little confused, they can call like Cabrini Legal Aid.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. So Cabrini Green Legal Aid has a free sealing and expungement help desk at the Daly Center on the 10th floor in room 1004. It's every day, and I believe it's every morning except for Thursdays. It's in the afternoon. Their schedule's on their website. You need to have your rap sheet with you when you go. They're not going to be able to do anything for you without the rap sheet. You have to have this to file. The rap sheet is only eligible to be obtained from 35th and Michigan Police Headquarters. You don't have to go through security, but you do have to pay $16 in order to get your rap sheet. There's no fee waiver. They'll do the live scan, so it's not inked. They're scanning your fingerprints. You come back a week later. It's super annoying. You come back a week later, you can get your rap sheet. So you're going to want to have that before you talk with these folks. But their service is entirely free, and they'll help you out.
What about it's another place similar to like Cabrini Legal Aid.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
Oh, Lambda Legal.
Lambda Legal.
Yeah.
Lambda Legal does not do this type of work at all. They do impact litigation, so there's like big cases to try to change a law. They don't do any kind of direct service work at all. Yeah, but they do have an attorney referral system, so if you call them, they'll refer you to people who have signed up, which means that they're self-proclaiming that they're gay-friendly, basically. Yeah. And this is something that we also do through the Trans Life Center as well. And we have a rap sheet program where we help people get their rap sheets. We'll drive you to 35th and Michigan to get it. It can be a little bit hard to get there. Okay. Any other questions about this? Sealing and expungement? Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of about this, but it's not.
Okay.
Okay, you talked about class 3 felonies.
Yeah.
Well, I have 2 class 3 felonies in my back home, but they are violent. So I wouldn't qualify.
Most likely not. I can tell you exactly the class 3 felonies that are eligible for sealing. The class 3 felonies are theft, retail theft, deceptive practice, forgery, and possession with intent to manufacture or deliver a controlled substance. Those are the only class 3s that are eligible. So then you're looking at certificate of rehabilitation and or executive clemency.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the best thing I should probably go for is executive.
And this is another thing that you can do at Cabrini Green. They will help, they have a whole clemency unit. They help people with clemencies. They're awesome. I love the attorneys there. They're super knowledgeable. I call them all the time for help because they know everything. So yeah, I really, really encourage you to go to them. I don't even know if you have to go to the 10th floor of the Daly Center for clemency. I think you can just call their office and schedule an intake. Yeah, yeah. And they're a legal aid organization, so it's I think $20 for an intake, and then the services are free. Pretty sure. Yeah.
Can I just make one point about that? Don't underestimate the certificate of rehabilitation.
Right.
It's one of the things that it does, which I just recently learned, is that it takes the liability, the legal liability off of the employer for hiring somebody with a felony background. So one of the reasons why places don't hire people with backgrounds is because they could get sued if you were to mess up. What this certificate does is says to the company, we are shielded from legal action by hiring you. So it's kind of huge that you can do it. They're hard to get for that reason, but you're capable of getting them, and that's one of the big reasons to go for them.
Can you do both?
Yeah, you could definitely do both. There's nothing in the statute that says you can't try to do both. And I really think that it's a good time to be doing clemencies, really. Even Cabrini Green has been so shocked by the number of clemencies that have been granted. I think that the administration really gets it right now, and so it's a great time. And also vote for Quentin. Okay, so the other little piece that I'm going to talk about today, and I just have a few more minutes left, is the name and gender marker change requirements for the state of Illinois. So to change your name in the state of Illinois, you need to be 18 years old or older, unless you have parental consent. If you don't have parental consent, there is a process that you can go through with the court system to petition on your own. It's very difficult to do that, though. And here in Illinois, we like to have both. We like to. The statute requires that both parents consent and or are notified. So if one parent is consenting and petitioning, the other parent just needs to be notified and given an opportunity to contest in court. You have to be a resident of Illinois for 6 months or longer. So that just means you have to have continually resided here. This is not an immigration requirement. You don't have to be a legal permanent resident of the country, although there may be some confusion with that, so it could be good to have an attorney if you do not have a green card or you're not a U.S. citizen. There are felony conviction restrictions. This is probably the biggest barrier that I've noticed to the name change process, which is that our statute says that there is a 10-year bar for any felony conviction, Class 4, Class X, the whole gamut, 10 years from the date that your probation or your parole terminated. That's when the 10 years start ticking, right? So if you were given 4 years, spent 2 years in IDOC, 2 years on parole, it's from when that 2 years on parole ends that the 10 years start. So an entire decade of waiting until you can petition. There are certain types of convictions that you actually can never change your name under the current law, which includes anything that requires registry with the sex offender registry and any identity theft crime. This is very strict compared to other states, very strict. There are many states that don't have any criminal restriction at all. In some states you can change your name even while you're in prison, like New York State, for example. I think they're kind of like, we got you, like, it's okay, right? And we have fingerprint numbers, we have modern technology, right? So no matter what your name is, we know how to find you. There's a bunch of issues with this law. For another time, we could talk about those, but some of the issues include the fact that, for example, you could change your name through marriage, and there's no felony restriction, right? So what is the sense of that? You can't change it on your own, but you can change it because you're legally marrying someone else. There are some strategies that, if this applies to you, you could consider. One of them, I mean, there is the marriage thing, but I'm not going to encourage anybody to get married just to change their name. But you know you. The other
That's
thing,
only the last name, right?
well, the statute says it's only the last name, but in practice, judges have changed full names. Yeah.
You can get married?
Yeah. So, and I know this because I've been talking to a family law attorney quite a bit about this, and that's what I've heard. Because the statute does, you're right, it says last name, surname, but in practice that's not quite how it works. In Cook County, judges do not do criminal background checks, so that means that your oath is being taken, that you do not have a criminal conviction. It's a Class 3 felony to lie under oath. So know that. Some states, they do require a criminal background, like you've gone and gotten fingerprinted and brought your rap sheet in. We don't do that, at least not in Cook County. Some other counties might do that. And then, of course, any state in the country, as long as you legally entered a name change in that state, Illinois will recognize. So if you go to a state like New York, you live there, you establish residency, you're a resident of the state of New York, you change your name in New York, Illinois has to recognize that name change as long as it was in accordance with New York laws, right? That's our kind of recognition of other states' laws, something that we're very familiar with in the same-sex marriage context, that there is not a recognition of other states' laws, which is very unusual, particularly in the marriage context. Okay, filing fees in Cook County, it costs just shy of $500 to file and publish notice of your name change. The publication requirement is required by statute for anybody who's an adult, so it doesn't apply to minors who are changing their names. You have to publish for 3 consecutive weeks in the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin in Cook County, or another newspaper if you live in a different county. Notice that you're changing your name. And this is kind of an archaic rule in case you're changing your name to avoid creditors, paying child support, if there's an open warrant out for your arrest and that's why you're changing your name. It gives people an opportunity to come and contest and find you. I have been practicing in Illinois for 7 years and I have never witnessed someone contesting a name change ever. I've probably helped people file, I don't know, 200 different cases. So it's just kind of a procedural requirement. And then you have this court order. It's a piece of paper that says your name has been changed. There's no automatic system. It doesn't like happen with all your documents in any kind of, quick way. It's your burden then with the name change paper to go to Social Security, passport office, DMV, change your school records, go to your employer, cell phone company, bank, all the places, and tell them that you've changed your name. And that court order is the legal mechanism that requires them to change it. Unlike the name change process, the gender change process is not a judicial process. So you're not going into court. It is, again, through the executive branch. So it's administrative law. That means you're going to go to the DMV and do something. You're going to go to the Department of Public Health Office of Vital Records and do something. You're going to go to Social Security and do something. And the doing something is different for each of those agencies. So this is a little frustrating. You will need different types of evidence of gender change depending on where you're changing your gender. If you were born in Illinois, right now our statute requires that you've had an operation. That is the quote from the statute. There is no definition in the statute of what that operation needs to be. So again, I read that like, oh, I had my tooth removed, like I'm a man now. But the department does not read it that way, tragically, even though my teeth are a huge part of my gender identity. Yeah.
I have a question about that. So, in a sense, if you are an F10 and you had a hysterectomy,
yes,
does that count?
Yes. Except,
okay.
So as trans folks, we just have to navigate the laws that were not designed with us in mind, right?
Yeah, it's...
I will tell you this. This is what happened. Historically, yes, that has been interpreted. Then we had a really bad case in 2005 with a trans man who thought that he had married someone and had a child with that person through our Artificial Insemination Act. Legally, father. He had had a hysterectomy. That was his mechanism for changing his gender marker. And his wife, who he thought was his wife, in the process of the divorce, said that actually their marriage was never valid because he was actually not male. And won in an Illinois appellate court. So the Illinois appellate court found that even though he changed his marker from the hysterectomy, that was not enough evidence for him to be declared legally male for the purposes of marriage at that time. So once that happened, we saw the department get really strict about the type of documentation they were requiring. Genital surgeries specifically, things that people just don't get, like metoidoplasty and phalloplasty and hysterectomy, like all sorts of things, right?
Wow, that's good. That's extremely expensive.
Extremely expensive, yeah. And like very few surgeons would do phalloplasty and metoidoplasty, right? Like it's just uncommon. So the ACLU litigated twice around this issue, and we now have a consent decree, which means sort of like a settlement, basically, that they are interpreting the statute more expansively. So people have been able to get it changed with hysterectomy, breast augmentation, breast reduction, mastectomy, orchiectomy, vaginoplasty. I even know somebody who's trying to get it changed from electrolysis because it was done by a doctor. And that is a surgery, irreversible, right? Gender specific. So we're really trying to play with this law right now. Hopefully, my hope is that we can change the law, and so we might need some activists in the future to push this. Because some states are removing the surgery requirement entirely. So New York, Washington, D.C., California have all removed the surgery requirement. And they're more in accordance with Social Security's standard and the Department of State, which is the passport agency, which requires a letter from a medical doctor. It has to be an MD, can't be a nurse practitioner, MSW, has to be an MD. That states that you've had appropriate clinical treatment for gender transition. Those are like the magic words. Doesn't have to get into detail about what that's been. Doesn't have to say how long you've been on hormones or whatever. Just has to say that. It can really, literally just say that and be signed by the doctor on their letterhead with their license number. And no questions asked, it will be changed. The reason why this is amazing, in part, is because 1, some folks don't want surgeries. 2, some people can't afford surgeries. 3, some people can't have them for health reasons, for a bunch of different reasons. Maybe they can't go under general anesthesia, whatever it is. And it really allows the doctor and the patient to determine what is appropriate, right? Appropriate could mean I've been in I know this person's been in a therapeutic process and that's it, right? It doesn't actually require any medical interventions at all. The DMV has a less strict requirement, so that can be a letter from an MSW, LCSW, nurse practitioner, registered nurse, someone that has some letters after their name that's medical or mental health-ish. Just saying that it's the recommendation that your gender marker be changed.
It can't just be any type of letter. It has to be a certain format.
It has to be a certain format. That's right. Yeah. Exactly.
Well,
It doesn't have to go into a lot of detail, though.
And let me say, it's gotten much, much easier over the last 15 years,
Right.
too.
Exactly. Yeah, it has. And I think that there is more understanding of transness, trans people existing in these administrations, certainly in Cook County. I can't speak to other counties, but that's definitely the case. So the thing that's important to note too about the gender marker change is that the gender marker is going to be really prime for a lot of things. Gender marker is going to control what public restrooms you're allowed to use under interpretations of the city ordinance. It's going to determine health insurance coverage potentially. It's going to determine whether or not you have to register for the selective service. It's going to determine how much your car insurance premiums will be, right? Like that's, gender markers do these things. It also does not have any criminal legal restriction. So you can change your gender marker even if you have this restriction up here on everything. And so some people don't know that. That's possible. Okay, questions about this? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Okay, so you get a gender marker change, it's trans woman, right?
Yeah.
You get a gender marker change. If you go out in a restaurant, and then they be like, you're trying to go into the woman's washroom.
Yeah.
And they just start, and they just go up, or they just, employees be involved. You're not supposed to be here, because they can identify, that you are trans. They say you can't go in there, and they just harass you because of that reason. Yeah. But that hasn't happened to me in a long time. That it did happen to me, honestly. So, like, what are you supposed to do? Like, are you supposed to just pull out your ID and be like, baby, look at my ID, it says female, hot, and then go about your day? Like, can they call the police and get you arrested?
Okay, so 1, yes, you should pull out your ID. You shouldn't have to do that, but there has been interpretation of the city of Chicago, public accommodations protections that say you should be able to use the restroom of your gender marker on your state ID.
Yeah.
So if you need to, you can be like, bam, there it is. And so you could file a complaint. You could actually start one of those discrimination complaints.
Can you go to is it another way that you can file a complaint? Like, okay, that place may have a grievance process.
Yeah.
But can you go to, like, is it the DPP? Do you go through them and file a complaint too?
Yeah, you could go through them, but you could go to the City of Chicago Commission on Human Relations and file one. Because in public accommodations, which is any business or building that's open to the public, so that includes like the public library, the CTA, public parks, Center on Halsted, these are all public places that are open to the public and accommodate the public. Restaurants, clothing stores, those are all public accommodations. You are protected from discrimination on the basis of your gender identity in the city of Chicago in public accommodations. So you have the right to actually file a civil complaint, which is like money damages, potentially fines, other types of things if that happens. And we actually have case law on this exact type of thing in restaurants specifically, trans folks being discriminated against in the bathrooms. It's totally a violation of the law. Yeah.
Park District 2 won a case.
How long?
What'd you say?
How long do you wait to file a complaint?
It's 180 days from the time the incident happened. You have to file within that time period. That doesn't mean that's when all the litigation will happen, but it's 180 days, so it's about 6 months from the date of the discrimination, unless it's ongoing. So like in an employment context, if you're being harassed all the time, that's ongoing continuous discrimination.
Oh yeah, speaking of that, like, okay, what if you go into a store, right?
Yeah.
And you're able to make your purchase, but you're constantly harassed by someone that's constantly out of you, like, what you are. Because everybody in this neighborhood does not know what you are. And this person is just jealous, just spiteful because they're ugly. And they always, they purposely bother you or say your name, let's say your ID out there, and they know damn well it's not a unisex name, like this is all a man's name. So you just want to be spiteful and
This is an employee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you go and you went to the manager and you tell them and you go back in there another day to make a purchase. Like you're able to make your purchases. It's constant harassment, like they want to get hands laid on them.
Yeah.
But you be like, no, like it's not worth it. But you're not about to continue to say and disrespect me. Like, what is your motive? Like, what is the reason?
Right. And this is discrimination and public accommodation. So if you can, think.
Can you record them with your phone? Is that illegal? If you go up in an establishment and this is a constant thing and you already told the manager or like appropriately, like you didn't go in wilding out, that being she, none of that. You just went to the manager and you told them like this person has some type of personal vendetta, I don't know what it is, and they keep constantly, verbally attacking me and abusing me when I come in to make purchases. They let me buy my things, but it's just going overboard, unnecessary.
I don't think it's illegal, actually, as long as they're not a cop. I don't think it's illegal, but I don't know that for sure, to record somebody without their consent.
Why they are doing that.
Yeah. I'm not sure the answer to that. Although where you're going with that is exactly where you need to go, which is you need to be collecting evidence. If you have a witness with you, that's helpful, someone to corroborate your story. So you could leave, come back with someone else who can just watch what's happening. If you can collect names of the staff person, manager, all that's helpful when you're filing a complaint. Because when they investigate, those are the people that they're going to call to be like, so what did you see when she entered the store, right? As the witness, right? And corroborate what you said. So, yeah, that's exactly what you need to do.